The knock on my door came at exactly 7:30 in the morning, which was already a bad sign because nobody with good intentions shows up that early on a Saturday. I opened the door to find Patricia Winters standing on my porch, clipboard in hand, wearing a beige pantsuit that screamed HOA president louder than any badge could. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tight I wondered if it was cutting off circulation to her brain, and her lips were pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "Mr. Daniels," she said, not bothering with pleasantries, "we need to discuss your generator." I blinked sleep out of my eyes. "My generator?" "Yes, the one running in your backyard. According to Section 14, Paragraph C of our HOA bylaws, generators are only permitted for emergency use during power outages. It's been running continuously for 3 days now, and the noise is disturbing the neighbors." I rubbed my face, trying to wake up enough to deal with this. "Patricia, there's a reason for that. If you'd let me explain." "I don't need explanations, Mr. Daniels. I need compliance." She tapped her clipboard with a manicured nail. "Either you shut it down voluntarily, or I'll have to issue a citation and fine you $500 per day until it's turned off." Behind me, I heard the steady beep of my father's medical equipment. The sound that had become the soundtrack to my life over the past 6 months since he'd moved in with me here in Phoenix, Arizona. "Look, can we talk about this inside?" I asked, glancing at my neighbors' houses. The last thing I needed was an audience. Patricia's eyes narrowed. "I'm perfectly comfortable discussing this here." "Fine," I said, keeping my voice level. "My father is on life support. The generator powers his medical equipment. The power grid in this neighborhood has been unreliable lately, and I can't risk him dying because of a brownout." For a moment, just a flicker, something like understanding crossed her face. Then it was gone, replaced by that same rigid determination. "That's very unfortunate, Mr. Daniels, but rules are rules. Other residents manage to comply with our guidelines. I'm sure you can find an alternative solution that doesn't violate HOA regulations." "An alternative solution?" I felt my temper rising. "You want me to risk my father's life so your neighbors can enjoy absolute silence? Don't be dramatic." She made a note on her clipboard. "Hospitals have backup systems that don't run continuously. I suggest you look into something similar. You have 48 hours to remedy this situation, or the fines begin." She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving me standing in my doorway, furious and incredulous. I closed the door and leaned against it, taking deep breaths. My father's nurse, Maria, appeared from the hallway, concern etched on her face. "Everything okay, Frank?" she asked. "HOA trouble," I muttered. "Apparently, keeping Dad alive is against community standards." Maria shook her head. "That woman has been nothing but problems since I started working here. Last week she complained about my car being parked in your driveway during my shift. She complained about your car, said it was an eyesore. It's a 2019 Honda Civic." Maria rolled her eyes. "Anyway, your father is awake. He's been asking for you." I made my way to the converted living room that now served as my father's medical suite. At 78, Frederick Daniels Sr. had been a force of nature until a stroke 6 months ago left him paralyzed and dependent on a ventilator. The doctors said he might improve with time, but progress was slow. In the meantime, I'd moved him from the rehabilitation facility into my home, determined to give him better care than any institution could provide. "Morning, Dad," I said, walking to his bedside. His eyes tracked me, alert and aware even if his body wouldn't cooperate. He couldn't speak with the ventilator tube, but we'd developed a system. 1 blink for yes, 2 for no, and a series of eye movements for more complex communication. It was frustratingly limited, but it was something. HOA problems, I told him, pulling up a chair. Patricia Winters wants me to shut down the generator. 2 blinks. No. His eyes widened slightly, as close to alarm as he could manage. Don't worry. I'm not shutting it down. I just need to figure out how to handle this. I squeezed his hand gently. You're my priority, Dad, not some ridiculous HOA rule. The next 48 hours passed in tense anticipation. I spent them researching my options, reading through the HOA bylaws, and consulting with a lawyer friend who specialized in property law. What I discovered wasn't encouraging. The HOA had broad authority, and while there were provisions for reasonable accommodations under disability law, challenging them would be expensive and time-consuming. On Monday morning, I received a certified letter. The fine had begun. $500 per day, backdated to when Patricia had first knocked on my door. They were also threatening to place a lien on my property if I didn't comply within 30 days. I immediately drafted a formal request for a reasonable accommodation under the Fair Housing Act, detailing my father's medical needs and the necessity of the generator. I included documentation from his doctors, specifications for his medical equipment, and data showing the power grid's unreliability in our area. I delivered it personally to Patricia's house that afternoon. She lived 3 streets over in a house that looked like it had been staged for a magazine shoot, all neutral colors and strategic landscaping. "Mr. Daniels," she said when she opened the door, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "How can I help you?" "I'm formally requesting a reasonable accommodation." I handed her the thick envelope. "Everything is documented. My father's condition, the medical necessity, the legal basis under federal law." She barely glanced at it. "I'll present it to the board at our next meeting." "When is that?" 3 weeks from Thursday. 3 weeks. "Patricia, I'm being fined $500 a day. That's over $10,000 by the time you even discuss this. Perhaps you should have considered that before violating our rules." She started to close the door. I put my hand against it, not forcefully, but enough to keep it open. "This isn't about rules. This is about my father's life. What if it was your father? What if you were in my position?" "I would have followed proper procedures from the beginning," she said coldly. "Now please remove your hand from my door, or I'll call the police for harassment." I stepped back, letting her slam the door in my face. The fines continued to accumulate. Every day, I'd find a new notice in my mailbox, a running tally of my supposed debt to the HOA. I refused to pay, and I refused to turn off the generator. My father's life wasn't negotiable. Then things got weird. On a Thursday afternoon, about a week after my confrontation with Patricia, I came home from the grocery store to find her standing in my backyard, inspecting the generator. She didn't hear me approach, too focused on examining the machine. "Can I help you?" I called out, making her jump. She spun around, clutching her chest. "You startled me. You're in my backyard without permission. That's called trespassing. I'm conducting an HOA inspection. I have the authority to access common areas and verify compliance. This isn't a common area. This is my private property." She ignored that, gesturing at the generator. "This is a commercial-grade unit, much more powerful than necessary for medical equipment. It powers the entire house, not just Dad's room. I need backup for everything in case of an outage." Patricia circled the generator slowly, like a predator sizing up prey. "How much does something like this cost?" The question caught me off guard. "Why does that matter?" Just curious. "It must be quite expensive and powerful." She ran her hand along the top of it, which was creepy enough that I stepped closer. "Patricia, you need to leave my property. Now." She looked at me with an odd expression, something calculating behind her eyes. The board is meeting next Tuesday, not 3 weeks from now. We moved it up to discuss your situation. Fine, I'll be there. It's a closed session. Residents aren't permitted to attend board meetings. Then how am I supposed to present my case? Everything will be handled fairly, Mr. Daniels. Trust the process. She walked past me toward the side gate. Oh, and you might want to lock this. Anyone could just walk in. After she left, I stood in my backyard for a long time, staring at the generator and trying to shake the uneasy feeling her visit had given me. Something about the way she'd looked at it, the questions she'd asked. It felt wrong. I mentioned it to Maria when she arrived for her evening shift. She was in your backyard. Maria's eyes went wide. Frank, that's not normal. Even for HOA presidents, I know. But what can I do? Call the cops because she was looking at my generator? Maybe you should. Start a paper trail at least. She had a point. I called the non-emergency police line and filed a report about the trespassing. The officer who took my information was sympathetic, but explained that unless Patricia came back without permission, there wasn't much they could do. Still, it was documented. That weekend, the power went out. It happened at 2 in the morning, a sudden plunge into darkness and silence except for the immediate kick of the generator taking over the load. I jolted awake, my first thought for my father. I rushed to his room where Maria was already checking his equipment. Everything's fine, she assured me. The generator picked up instantly, not even a flicker. I exhaled in relief. What caused the outage? No idea. It's dark all up and down the street, though. We stood at the window, looking out at the neighborhood shrouded in blackness. All except my house, where lights glowed warmly and the generator hummed steadily in the backyard. At least now people will understand why you need it, Maria said. She was wrong. The next morning I woke to pounding on my door. When I opened it, Patricia stood there with 2 other people I recognized from the neighborhood. Behind them, 3 more residents gathered on my lawn. Mr. Daniels, Patricia said, her voice sharp. We need your generator. Excuse me. The power outage has been going on for hours. Some of us have freezers full of food that's going to spoil. Your generator is clearly powerful enough to share. We're asking you to extend cords to the affected homes. I stared at her, genuinely speechless. You can't be serious, I finally managed. Completely serious. This is a community, Mr. Daniels. We help each other in times of need. My generator is running my father's life support equipment. I'm not plugging in your freezer. A woman behind Patricia stepped forward. Her name was Rebecca Garrison, and she lived 2 houses down. My freezer has $500 worth of meat in it. All I need is enough power to keep it running until the electricity comes back. I have medications that need to stay refrigerated, another man added. This is a medical necessity too. Patricia crossed her arms. See. Multiple residents with legitimate needs. Your generator can handle it. Stop being selfish. Selfish? My voice rose. You've been fining me $500 a day for running this generator to keep my father alive, and now you want to use it for your convenience. This is different. This is an emergency. My father's condition is a permanent emergency. The answer is no. Patricia's face flushed red. Then you leave me no choice. As of this moment, I'm invoking emergency authority under HOA bylaws to commandeer necessary resources during a community crisis. You're going to what? Your generator is now under HOA jurisdiction until the power is restored. We'll compensate you fairly for the fuel costs. You can't do that. That's theft. It's community resource allocation. If you refuse to cooperate, I'll have no choice but to contact the authorities about your ongoing violations and your aggressive behavior toward HOA representatives. The small crowd behind her murmured agreement. I recognized most of them. These were people I'd waved to, made small talk with at the mailbox, normal neighbors. Now they stood on my lawn demanding I risk my father's life for their groceries. "Get off my property," I said quietly. "All of you." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "You're making a serious mistake." "No, you are. If anyone touches my generator, I'll have them arrested. Now leave." I closed the door and locked it, my hands shaking with rage. Through the window, I watched them retreat to the street, where they huddled together talking. Patricia was gesticulating angrily, clearly rallying her troops. The power came back on around noon, ending the immediate crisis. But the damage was done. Word spread through the neighborhood about my refusal to help during an emergency. I started getting dirty looks when I checked my mail. Someone left a note on my car calling me selfish and telling me to move if I couldn't be a team player. The HOA board meeting happened that Tuesday, just as Patricia had said. I wasn't allowed to attend, but I submitted a written statement along with additional medical documentation. I also included information about the trespassing incident and Patricia's attempt to commandeer my generator. The decision came 2 days later in another certified letter. The board had voted to deny my request for accommodation. Their reasoning was that my generator was excessive and unnecessarily disruptive, and that I should explore quieter alternatives like battery backup systems. The fines would continue, and legal action to place a lien on my home would proceed if I remained non-compliant. I sat at my kitchen table, reading the letter over and over, trying to process the sheer callousness of it. These people were willing to risk a man's life over noise complaints and their own wounded pride. "This is insane," I told my lawyer friend David over the phone. "There has to be something we can do." "You can sue," David said. "File a federal complaint under the Fair Housing Act. But Frank, you're looking at months of litigation, maybe years. And these HOA cases are tricky. They have a lot of leeway. So I just keep paying fines I don't owe. Or you turn off the generator and risk your father's health. Or you move. Those are basically your options unless you want to fight a long legal battle." "I can't move. Dad's too fragile for that kind of upheaval, and I'm not turning off his life support." "Then we fight. I'll start drafting a complaint. In the meantime, document everything. Every interaction with Patricia, every fine, every incident. We'll need it." I took his advice seriously. I installed security cameras around my property, covering the generator, the gates, the front door. I kept detailed logs of everything related to my father's care and the generator's operation. I photographed every notice the HOA sent me. 3 days after the board's decision, my generator was vandalized. I discovered it when the morning started with silence. The generator had shut down. I ran outside in my pajamas and found the fuel line cut, oil draining onto the concrete pad beneath it. Someone had also damaged the electrical connections. My heart hammered as I sprinted back inside. In my father's room, his equipment was running on internal battery backup, but those would only last another 30 minutes at most. "Call 911, I told Maria, already on my phone with the generator repair company. "Tell them we need emergency medical transport. We have to get Dad to a hospital until this is fixed." The next hour was chaos. Paramedics arrived and stabilized my father for transport. The police came to document the vandalism. The repair technician showed up and gave me the bad news that he'd need to order parts, at least 2 days before the generator would work again. My father was readmitted to the hospital, where he'd be safe but miserable. He hated hospitals, hated being away from home. I could see it in his eyes as they loaded him into the ambulance, the fear and confusion. The police officer taking my statement was a young guy named Martinez. He examined the damage carefully, took photos, and asked detailed questions. "Any idea who might have done this?" he asked. "My HOA president has been harassing me about this generator for weeks," I said, pulling out my phone to show him the documentation I'd been keeping. "She even tried to commandeer it during the power outage last weekend." Martinez's eyebrows rose as he read through everything. "This is quite a conflict, but making the jump from HOA dispute to vandalism is serious. Do you have any proof she was involved?" "Not yet. But I installed security cameras after she trespassed in my yard. Let me check the footage." We went to my computer and I pulled up the camera feeds. My hands clenched into fists as we watched the footage from 3 in the morning. A figure in dark clothing approached the generator, spent several minutes working on it, then left. The angle and darkness made it impossible to identify who it was, but the person's build and movement looked female. "Can you enhance this?" I asked. "Not like in the movies, no, but our tech guys might be able to clean it up a little." Martinez made notes in his report. "I'm going to list this as felony vandalism and criminal mischief. Given the medical circumstances, we might also be able to add reckless endangerment." "What about the HOA angle? If we can prove who did it and establish they knew about your father's medical needs, that strengthens the case. But right now, we've got an unidentified suspect." He handed me his card. "Get me that video file and I'll see what our people can do with it. In the meantime, any other incidents you call immediately." After Martinez left, I sat alone in my too quiet house, staring at the frozen frame of someone destroying my property and endangering my father's life. Whether it was Patricia or someone acting on her behalf, the HOA had crossed a line from petty harassment into criminal behavior. The repair took 3 days, not 2. 3 days of my father in a hospital where the staff was competent but stretched thin, where he was just another patient instead of someone receiving personalized care. 3 days of watching him deteriorate emotionally, even as his body remained stable. When I finally brought him home, Maria and I got him settled while the new, even more robust security system I'd installed recorded everything. I'd added motion-activated lights, multiple cameras with night vision, and an alarm that would notify my phone of any activity near the generator. I also hired a lawyer, not David, who was a friend but not a specialist. I found Sarah Chen, an attorney who focused on disability rights and Fair Housing Act cases. She was expensive but came highly recommended. "This is one of the more egregious cases I've seen," Sarah told me in our initial consultation, reviewing all my documentation. "The HOA is clearly violating federal law. The vandalism complicates things, but it might also help us." "How?" "It demonstrates a pattern of hostility and retaliation. If we can connect it to Patricia or the HOA board, that's powerful evidence of discrimination." She leaned back in her chair. "Here's what I recommend. We file a federal complaint immediately, requesting an emergency injunction to stop the fines and protect your right to use the generator. We also send a strongly worded letter to the HOA's lawyer, putting them on notice that they're breaking federal law." "Will that stop Patricia?" "It should make her much more careful. HOAs carry liability insurance, but that insurance doesn't cover willful violations of federal law. If we can prove they knew they were breaking the law and did it anyway, the board members could be personally liable for damages." That got my attention. Personal liability. If they're acting outside the scope of their authority or breaking the law, the corporate veil doesn't protect them. That means their personal assets are at risk. I smiled for the first time in days. "Let's do it." Sarah moved fast. Within a week, the HOA received a federal complaint and a letter from Sarah explaining in detail exactly how much legal trouble they were in. The fines stopped immediately. I received a terse email from the HOA's lawyer requesting a meeting to discuss resolution. But Patricia wasn't done. 2 weeks after my father came home, I received notice that the HOA was conducting a special assessment of all properties to fund necessary security improvements. Every homeowner was being charged $5,000. The assessment was mandatory, with the same lien threats if we didn't pay. It was transparently retaliatory, and Sarah pounced on it immediately, adding it to our complaint as further evidence of harassment. But it also showed me how far Patricia was willing to go. She'd rather burn down the entire neighborhood than admit she was wrong. The response from other homeowners surprised me. Several neighbors reached out privately to express support. Turned out Patricia's reign as HOA president had made her plenty of enemies. The special assessment was the last straw for many people who'd been quietly tolerating her overreach. A man named George, who lived on the corner, organized a petition to call an emergency meeting to vote on the assessment. He collected signatures from over half the neighborhood, more than enough to force the meeting under the HOA's bylaws. Patricia's been a nightmare for years, George told me when he stopped by to explain what was happening. She fined me $300 because my grass was 2 inches too tall. 2 inches. I was in the hospital for surgery. Why didn't anyone stand up to her before? Easier not to. Fighting the HOA is expensive and exhausting. Most people just pay the fines and try to stay off her radar. He shook his head. But this assessment affects everyone. People are angry, and your situation with your father really opened eyes, made people realize how far she's willing to go. The emergency meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening at the community clubhouse. I debated whether to attend. Part of me wanted to stay home with Dad, avoid the drama. But Sarah convinced me that showing up and presenting my side directly to the community was important. Let them see you as a person, not just the guy Patricia complains about, she said. Let them hear about your father's needs. Humanize this. So I went, arriving early to find the clubhouse already packed. Every seat was filled with people standing along the walls. The energy in the room crackled with tension. This wasn't just about my generator anymore. This had become a referendum on Patricia's leadership. Patricia sat at the front table with the other board members, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. When she saw me, her eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. George called the meeting to order and outlined the purpose of gathering to discuss the special assessment. Patricia immediately tried to take control. This meeting is out of order, she declared. Special assessments are within the board's authority and don't require resident approval. Actually, Sarah said, standing up in the back, and I hadn't even realized she'd come. Under Arizona law and your own bylaws, residents can challenge any assessment over $1,000 per household. That's exactly what's happening here. And who are you? Sarah Chen, attorney representing Frank Daniels. I'm here to ensure everything proceeds legally. Patricia's jaw clenched. This is a residents' meeting. Outsiders aren't permitted. I'm here as Mr. Daniels' representative, which is explicitly allowed under your bylaws. Would you like me to cite the specific section? Before Patricia could respond, George intervened. Let's focus on the assessment. Patricia, can you explain exactly what these security improvements are and why they cost $5,000 per household? Patricia launched into a prepared speech about enhanced lighting, additional cameras, and regular security patrols. It all sounded reasonable until people started asking questions. Why do we need security patrols? We've never had a crime problem, one woman asked. What about the cameras? Are they going in common areas or monitoring individual properties? Another man called out. And why does this have to happen right now? Why not budget for it gradually? George pressed. Patricia's answers got increasingly evasive. She couldn't provide detailed cost estimates or explain why this was suddenly urgent. As the meeting went on, it became obvious that the assessment was poorly thought out at best, completely fabricated at worst. Then Rebecca Garrison stood up. The same Rebecca who demanded access to my generator during the power outage. "I think we all know what this is really about," she said. "This is retaliation against Frank Daniels. Patricia's trying to make him pay for challenging her authority." "That's completely false," Patricia snapped. "This assessment has nothing to do with Mr. Daniels and his ongoing violations." "What violations?" Rebecca shot back. "The man is keeping his dying father alive. There's no violation in that. He's running a generator 24/7 in violation of our noise ordinances." "Then change the ordinances," someone else yelled. "Make an exception for medical equipment." "We can't just make exceptions whenever someone demands it. That's chaos." "It's called being human," George said quietly. "Patricia, you've run this HOA like a dictatorship for 3 years. This assessment, the fines against Frank, all of it is you abusing your power. It needs to stop." The room erupted in agreement. People started standing, shouting their own grievances against Patricia. Stories poured out of excessive fines, arbitrary rule enforcement, personal vendettas. It was like a dam breaking, years of resentment flooding out at once. Patricia stood up, her face bright red. "I don't have to listen to this. This meeting is adjourned." "You can't adjourn a meeting you didn't call," Sarah said calmly. "Sit down, Miss Winters. I'm the HOA president. I'll adjourn whatever meetings I want." "Actually," one of the other board members, a quiet man named Tom, spoke up, "I'd like to hear more of what people have to say. Patricia, maybe we should consider a vote on this assessment." Patricia whirled on him. "Are you seriously undermining me right now? I'm suggesting we listen to our community. That's what we're supposed to do." George seized the moment. "I move that we vote on the special assessment. All in favor of rejecting it." Hands shot up across the room. George counted quickly. "That's 43 households represented in favor of rejection. Against?" Only 5 hands went up, including Patricia's. "The assessment is rejected," George declared. "Now I'd like to call for a vote of no confidence in Patricia Winters as HOA president." Patricia went pale. "You can't do that." "I just did. And according to our bylaws, any vote of no confidence requires a simple majority to trigger a special election." George looked around the room. All in favor. Even more hands than before. It wasn't even close. 47 households in favor, George announced. "Patricia Winters, you are removed as HOA president effective immediately. A special election will be held in 30 days. For a moment, Patricia just stood there, trembling with rage. Then she grabbed her purse and stormed out, shoving past people without a word. The remaining board members looked shell-shocked but didn't protest. After the meeting, dozens of people came up to me to apologize, to express support, to share their own Patricia horror stories. It was overwhelming and vindicating at the same time. "Thank you," I told George. "I didn't expect any of this. We should have done it years ago," he admitted. "Sometimes it takes someone standing up to a bully to remind everyone else they don't have to take it." But Patricia wasn't finished. She might have lost her position, but she'd lost something else too, something more important to her: control. And that made her dangerous. 2 days after the meeting, Officer Martinez called me. "Mr. Daniels, we got the enhanced video back from our tech team. We can't definitively identify the person who vandalized your generator, but we can see they drove up in a silver Lexus sedan. Does that match anyone involved in your HOA dispute?" My stomach dropped. "Patricia Winters drives a silver Lexus. That's interesting. Can you check your camera footage and see if you caught a license plate? I pulled up the footage immediately. The angle was bad, but there was one frame where the car's plate was partially visible. I sent it to Martinez. That's enough, he said after reviewing it. Combined with the make and model, we can get a warrant to check Miss Winter's vehicle and see if it matches. We'll also request her cell phone location data for that night. What happens if it was her? Then we arrest her for felony vandalism, criminal mischief, and reckless endangerment. Given your father's medical condition, the DA will take this seriously. 3 days later, Patricia was arrested at her home. The evidence was apparently solid. Her car matched the footage. Her cell phone pinged off the tower near my house at the time of the vandalism, and she'd made several suspicious Google searches about disabling generators in the days before the incident. The arrest made the local news. HOA president arrested for vandalizing resident's medical generator ran in the Phoenix Chronicle. The story detailed the dispute, my father's condition, and Patricia's apparent retaliation. It wasn't just local news either. The story got picked up by national outlets as one of those HOA nightmare stories that periodically go viral. Suddenly, my phone was ringing with interview requests from news stations, podcasts, and even a couple of documentary producers. I declined most of them, not interested in making this into entertainment. But I did agree to one interview with a local news station, figuring it might help other people dealing with similar HOA abuse. The reporter, a sharp woman named Jennifer, came to my house and interviewed me in my living room where we could hear the steady beep of Dad's monitors in the background. "What do you want people to take away from your story?" she asked. "That HOAs have too much unchecked power," I said. "They can fine you, put liens on your home, make your life miserable, all without any real oversight. And when they're run by someone on a power trip like Patricia, it becomes dangerous. My father almost died because someone was more concerned about noise complaints than human life. What would you like to see change? Better regulations, real accountability, maybe even a state ombudsman for HOA disputes. People shouldn't have to hire lawyers and file federal complaints just to protect their basic rights." The interview aired that evening and apparently struck a nerve. My phone blew up with messages from people sharing their own HOA horror stories. State representatives reached out, suddenly interested in HOA reform legislation. It felt like something bigger than my personal situation was building. Patricia's criminal case moved forward. She pleaded not guilty, and her lawyer tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial. But the prosecution was confident. They'd also discovered that Patricia had sent text messages to another board member the night before the vandalism, saying that she was going to handle the Daniels problem once and for all. That text message was devastating for her defense. It showed premeditation and intent. Her lawyer started making noise about a plea deal. Meanwhile, the HOA special election happened. George ran for president and won in a landslide. One of his first acts was to formally rescind all the fines against me and issue a written apology on behalf of the board. He also worked with Sarah to establish a formal reasonable accommodation policy that would prevent future incidents like mine. "We're going to do better," George told me when he came by to deliver the apology in person. Patricia's reign was an embarrassment. Time for this community to actually act like a community. The new board approved permanent use of my generator within a week. No restrictions, no conditions. They even helped me build a sound dampening enclosure around it to address the original noise concerns, funded by the HOA. 3 months after her arrest, Patricia accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to felony criminal mischief and was sentenced to 18 months in prison, 3 years of probation, and restitution to me for the generator damage and my father's hospital bills. The judge was particularly harsh in her sentencing remarks. "You held a position of trust and authority in your community," the judge said. "Instead of using that position to help your neighbors, you weaponized it against someone caring for a dying parent. Your actions endangered a vulnerable man's life. That is unconscionable." I attended the sentencing with Sarah and my father's nurse Maria. Watching Patricia in her orange jumpsuit, looking small and defeated, I felt no satisfaction, just relief that it was finally over. My father's condition had stabilized. He wasn't getting better, but he wasn't getting worse either. The doctors said this was likely his new normal. He'd never walk or talk again, but his mind remained sharp, trapped in a body that wouldn't cooperate. We adapted. I learned to read the subtlest changes in his expression, to anticipate his needs before he could signal them. Maria became part of our family, as dedicated to Dad's care as I was. The generator continued running 24/7, its hum becoming such a part of the background that I barely noticed it anymore. Funny how something so critical could become so ordinary. The broader impact of the case continued rippling outward. Arizona state legislators introduced the Fair Housing Protection Act, specifically addressing HOA overreach in cases involving medical necessity and disability accommodations. It would require HOAs to provide expedited review processes for medical-related requests and impose penalties on boards that retaliated against residents seeking accommodations. I was asked to testify before the state legislature about my experience. Standing in the Capitol building, telling my story to a room full of lawmakers felt surreal, but they listened. The bill passed both houses with strong bipartisan support and was signed into law 6 months after Patricia's arrest. "You changed things," Sarah told me the day the governor signed the bill. "Not just for you, but for thousands of people across the state." "I just wanted to keep my father alive," I said. "Sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone." Life gradually returned to something resembling normal, though with a new definition of normal that included round-the-clock medical care, a generator running in perpetuity, and a community that had learned some hard lessons about compassion and common sense. George proved to be an excellent HOA president. He simplified the rules, focused on actual community improvements rather than nitpicking enforcement, and created an appeals process for disputes. The neighborhood felt different, less tense. People actually talked to each other again instead of living in fear of citations. Rebecca Garrison, who defended me at that crucial meeting, became a friend. She stopped by occasionally with baked goods and conversation, often sitting with my father for a while, reading him the newspaper or just providing company. She told me she felt guilty about the freezer incident. "I was caught up in the mob mentality," she admitted. "Patricia made it sound so reasonable, like you were being selfish. I didn't think about what I was actually asking you to risk." "You stood up when it mattered," I told her. "That's what counts." 1 year after the generator incident began, the neighborhood held a community barbecue. George organized it as a way to celebrate the new HOA and bring people together. I almost didn't go, hesitant to leave my father even though Maria would be there. But Dad himself insisted, blinking emphatically and moving his eyes toward the door until I understood he wanted me to get out of the house. The barbecue was held in the community park, and nearly everyone showed up. Kids ran around playing, adults clustered in conversation groups, and the smell of grilling meat filled the air. It felt like an actual community for the first time since I'd moved there. George made a short speech thanking everyone for embracing the changes, and specifically mentioning how the previous year's challenges had made them stronger. He didn't name me directly, but people glanced my way, and I felt their warmth and support. Later, as the sun set and string lights came on, creating a warm glow over the gathering, Tom approached me. He was the board member who'd first broken ranks with Patricia during that meeting. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I should have stood up to Patricia months before things got that bad. I knew what she was doing was wrong, but I took the easy road and kept quiet." "You found your courage when it counted," I said, echoing what I'd told Rebecca. "Still, I think about your father, what could have happened. It keeps me up at night sometimes." I looked around at the gathering, at people laughing and relaxing, at the community that had almost torn itself apart. We all make choices. What matters is learning from them. This, I gestured at the scene around us, this is what matters now. Tom nodded, looking relieved. We stood together in comfortable silence, watching kids chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. When I got home that night, I checked on my father. He was awake, eyes tracking me as I entered. "Had a good time at the barbecue," I told him, settling into my usual chair beside his bed. "The neighborhood's really different now. People are actually nice to each other." One blink. Yes. His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, as close to a smile as he could manage. "You know, none of this would have happened if you hadn't gotten sick, if you hadn't needed that generator." I paused, gathering my thoughts. "I spent so much time being angry about what happened to you. The stroke, the paralysis, everything you lost. But somehow this nightmare with Patricia, the generator, all of it, it brought something good too. It changed this place, made people remember how to be human with each other." 2 blinks. No, then a series of eye movements I'd learned meant he wanted to spell something. We went through our painstaking alphabet system, where I'd recite letters and he'd blink when I hit the right one. "Proud, you're proud?" I asked, 1 blink. "Yes," my eyes stung with sudden tears. "Thanks, Dad. That means everything." We sat together in the quiet hum of machines keeping him alive, powered by the generator that had caused so much trouble and ultimately changed so much. Outside, I could hear the distant sounds of neighbors talking as they walked home from the barbecue, relaxed and happy. The generator ran on, faithful and steady, the heartbeat of our home. It would run for as long as my father needed it, protected now by law and community support instead of threatened by petty tyranny. Patricia was gone, serving her time and hopefully learning something about the consequences of cruelty. I thought about the judge's words at sentencing. Unconscionable. That's what she'd called Patricia's actions. But maybe the real unconscionable thing was how easy it had been for one person to abuse authority for so long, unchecked and enabled by a system that gave too much power and too little accountability. The new law wouldn't fix everything. There would still be bad HOAs, still be Patricias in the world. But maybe, just maybe, the next person fighting to keep their parent alive wouldn't have to fight as hard as I did. Maybe they'd have legal protections and a clear path forward instead of having to wage a months-long battle. That was something worth fighting for, something worth everything we'd been through. My father's eyes had closed, his breathing settled into the rhythm of sleep. I watched him for a moment, this man who'd raised me, taught me right from wrong, showed me what strength looked like. Even now, trapped in his failing body, he was teaching me. About resilience, about fighting for what matters, about finding meaning in suffering. I stood and stretched, my back aching from the tension of the day. The house was quiet except for the familiar sounds, the ventilator's rhythmic whoosh, the beep of monitors, the steady hum of the generator outside. These sounds used to fill me with anxiety, a constant reminder of how fragile everything was. Now they were just home. In the kitchen, I found a note from Maria saying she'd restocked the medical supplies and adjusted one of Dad's medications per the doctor's orders. She'd also left cookies she'd baked, still warm in a container on the counter. I took one and sat at the table, pulling out my laptop to check emails. There was one from Sarah with the subject line, "Thought you'd want to see this." The email contained a link to a news article about another HOA in Tucson that had tried to ban a resident's wheelchair ramp. The resident had cited the new Fair Housing Protection Act, and the HOA had backed down immediately, even paying for the ramp installation as an apology. "This is your legacy," Sarah had written. "1 year in, and it's already making a difference." I smiled, thinking about all the people I'd never meet who wouldn't have to fight like I had. All the families who could care for their loved ones without fear of fines and harassment. It didn't erase what we'd gone through, but it gave it meaning beyond our personal struggle. The next morning, I woke early and went through my usual routine. Check on Dad, review the monitor readings, consult with Maria about the day's care plan. Everything normal, everything manageable. The generator ran smoothly in the background, as reliable as sunrise. After breakfast, I took my coffee outside to the backyard, standing near the generator. I'd built that sound-dampening enclosure the HOA had helped fund, and it really did make a difference. The hum was noticeable if you were right next to it, but barely audible from the house. A reasonable compromise, the kind that should have happened from the beginning if Patricia had been interested in actual solutions instead of control. My phone rang. It was David, my lawyer friend, who'd first helped me understand my options. "Hey Frank, saw you made the news again," he said. "Another HOA backing down because of the new law. Sarah sent me the article, pretty satisfying. You should be proud. Most people would have given up or moved. You stuck it out and changed things." I didn't have much choice. Moving wasn't an option with Dad's condition. "There's always a choice. You chose to fight. That takes guts." He paused. "Actually, I'm calling because I have a favor to ask. I've got a client dealing with an HOA nightmare. Different situation, but similar dynamics. Would you be willing to talk to her, share your experience, of course? Have her call me anytime." After we hung up, I stood in my backyard for a while longer, thinking about how strange life was. A year ago, I'd been drowning in stress and fear, fighting a battle I wasn't sure I could win. Now, I was some kind of reluctant expert in HOA disputes, helping others navigate their own nightmares. The woman David mentioned called that afternoon. Her name was Linda, and her HOA was trying to ban her emotional support dog despite her documented anxiety disorder. She sounded exhausted and defeated. "I don't know if I can keep fighting," she said. "They just keep piling on fines. My lawyer says we'll win eventually, but eventually might be too late. I can't afford these fines." "Don't pay them," I said. "Not a dollar." "The moment you start paying, you're admitting they're legitimate. Let them pile up. Document everything. Get your doctor's documentation airtight, and know that you're on the right side here. They're breaking federal law, not you. But they're threatening to foreclose on my house." That's a process that takes months, and it won't get that far. Once you file a federal complaint, they'll back down. The new Arizona law is on your side, too. Have your lawyer cite that. We talked for over an hour. I shared every detail of my experience, every tactic that worked, every mistake I'd made. By the end of the call, Linda sounded stronger, more determined. "Thank you," she said. "I was about to give up. Hearing that someone else won makes me think I can too." "You will," I assured her. "Just remember, they're counting on you giving up. That's their whole strategy. Exhaust you until compliance seems easier than fighting. Don't give them that satisfaction. After we hung up, I felt energized in a way I hadn't in months. Maybe this was part of my purpose now, helping others fight their battles. God knows I'd learned enough lessons the hard way. That evening, as I sat with my father during his dinner feeding, I told him about Linda's call. "Feels good to help someone else navigate this," I said. Like maybe all the crap we went through had a purpose beyond just us. One blink. Yes. You know what's funny? If you'd asked me 2 years ago if I could handle something like this, I'd have said no way. I was just a regular guy living his life. I'd never fought with anyone over anything. And suddenly, I'm battling an HOA, dealing with lawyers and cops and news reporters. It's surreal. My father's eyes held mine, intense and focused. Then he began the eye movements for spelling. I grabbed my alphabet board. STRONGER. "I'm stronger now?" I asked. One blink. Yes, maybe. Or maybe I just learned I was stronger than I thought. I set down the alphabet board. "Either way, I learned it from you. You never gave up, even when the stroke took everything. You kept fighting. That's what got me through all this, knowing you were fighting, so I had to fight too." We finished the feeding in comfortable silence. Outside, the generator hummed its endless song. Inside, machines beeped and whirred, keeping my father alive. It was our normal, our life. Strange and difficult, but ours. The months that followed brought a new rhythm. I continued consulting with people dealing with HOA disputes, becoming an informal expert in the community. George asked me to join the HOA board, but I declined. I'd had enough of HOA politics to last a lifetime. Instead, I agreed to serve on an advisory committee focused on reasonable accommodations and community standards. Patricia was released from prison after serving 9 months of her 18-month sentence, eligible for early release due to good behavior. I heard she moved to a different state, away from the neighborhood she'd tried to dominate. I felt no vindication at her downfall, no satisfaction. Just relief that she was someone else's problem now. My father's condition remained stable. We celebrated his 79th birthday with a small gathering. Maria, Rebecca, George, and a few other neighbors came over. We decorated his room with balloons and streamers, and Rebecca had baked a cake. Dad couldn't eat it, of course, but we could tell he enjoyed the celebration. His eyes were bright, engaged, present in a way that transcended his physical limitations. "Make a wish, Dad," I said, holding the cake close so he could see the candles. His eyes moved to me, held my gaze, and I swear I saw him make a wish. Then I blew out the candles for him, and everyone cheered. That night, after everyone left and the house was quiet again, I sat with my father in the dim light of his medical equipment. "You know what I think you wished for?" I asked him. 2 blinks. No, he didn't want me to guess. Then more eye movements. "THANKYOU, you wish to say thank you," my voice caught. "Dad, you don't need to thank me. You're my father. This is what family does." But he kept blinking insistently, and I understood. He needed to express this, needed me to hear it even if I didn't think it was necessary. "Okay," I said softly. "You're welcome, for everything. For fighting for you, for bringing you home, for not giving up. You're welcome, Dad." 1 blink. Yes. Then his eyes closed, exhausted from the emotion and effort of the day. I sat there long after he fell asleep, thinking about everything that had brought us to this moment. The stroke that had nearly killed him. The decision to bring him home instead of leaving him in a facility. The generator that became the center of a war I never wanted to fight. Patricia's cruelty and eventual downfall. The community coming together. The law that changed. The people I'd helped. It was all connected, each piece leading to the next in ways I couldn't have predicted or planned. All I'd done was make the best choices I could with the information I had, driven by love and stubbornness in equal measure. The generator hummed outside, faithful as always. I thought about that first morning Patricia had knocked on my door, demanding I shut it down. I'd been terrified then, convinced I was about to lose everything. But I'd underestimated my own capacity to fight, underestimated the decency of my community once they understood what was really at stake. Patricia had been so certain of her power, so confident that rules and authority would win over basic human compassion. She'd been wrong. In the end, that was her downfall. Not just that she broke the law, though she did, but that she forgot, or never understood, that communities are built on relationships and mutual support, not rigid enforcement and fear. The new HOA board understood that. George sent out a newsletter each month highlighting community members doing good things for each other. He organized volunteer days where people helped elderly neighbors with yard work. He created an emergency contact list so everyone knew who to call if they needed help. Simple things that built connection instead of division. My house, once the center of controversy, became something of a community gathering point. Rebecca started a weekly book club that met in my living room, partially to give me adult conversation and partially to keep Dad company. Other neighbors would stop by with food or just to chat. Maria invited her family over sometimes, and my father seemed to enjoy the chaos of her grandchildren running around. Life wasn't perfect. Dad's care remained demanding, expensive, and emotionally draining. Some days were harder than others. Some days I felt crushed by the responsibility and grief of watching my vital, active father trapped in a failing body. But we managed. We adapted. We found joy where we could. The generator kept running, day after day, month after month. I maintained it religiously, checking fluid levels, changing filters, testing the transfer switches. It had become more than just a machine to me. It was a symbol of defiance, of love, of the choice to fight for what matters even when the fight seems impossible. 2 years after the initial conflict with Patricia, I received an invitation to speak at a national conference on HOA reform. Advocacy groups from across the country were gathering in Washington, D.C., to push for federal legislation that would limit HOA powers and protect homeowners' rights. I almost declined. Leaving my father for several days, even with Maria's excellent care, felt impossible. But Dad insisted, spelling out GO with such emphatic eye movements that I couldn't refuse. So I booked a flight, arranged for extra nursing coverage, and headed to the nation's capital. The conference was eye-opening. I met people with stories that made mine seem mild, families who'd lost their homes over minor violations, veterans denied the right to fly the American flag, people with disabilities facing discrimination far worse than what I'd experienced. The common thread was HOAs wielding unchecked power and using it to bully residents into submission. When my turn came to speak, I stood before a room of several hundred advocates, activists, and legislators. I told my story simply and honestly. The generator, my father's needs, Patricia's harassment and eventual criminal actions, the community's transformation, the state law that had resulted. The system is designed to wear you down, I concluded, to make you give up because fighting is too expensive, too exhausting, too complicated. They count on that. But here's what I learned. You're stronger than you think. Your community is better than you think. And justice, real justice, is worth fighting for even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. The applause was overwhelming. Afterward, dozens of people approached me with their stories, asking for advice, sharing their struggles. I stayed late into the evening, talking with anyone who wanted to share their experience. A woman from Nevada told me about her HOA trying to ban her son's medical equipment because it was unsightly. A man from Florida described being fined for parking his work truck in his own driveway. A couple from Texas had been threatened with foreclosure over a garden gnome. Some stories were absurd, some were heartbreaking. All of them were real people dealing with real abuse of power by organizations that were supposed to serve their communities. "What do we do?" someone asked during a breakout session. "How do we fix this?" "Multiple approaches," I said. Federal legislation to establish baseline protections. State laws that limit HOA authority, but also get involved in your own HOAs. Run for the board. Attend meetings. Don't cede control to people like Patricia who treat it as their personal fiefdom. These organizations only have the power we give them. Flying home, I felt both energized and exhausted. The conference had reminded me how lucky I'd been in some ways. My community had ultimately supported me. The police had taken the vandalism seriously. The legal system had worked, eventually. Many people faced much worse with far fewer resources. When I walked into my house, the sound of the generator and medical equipment felt like a warm greeting. I was home. I went immediately to my father's room where Maria was reading him a thriller novel. "Frank," she looked up with a smile. "How was the conference?" "Good, intense. I'll tell you about it later." I moved to Dad's bedside. "Hey, old man, miss me?" One blink. Yes, his eyes were bright, alert, happy to see me. "Missed you too, but you were right. I needed to go." Met a lot of people who needed to hear that they're not alone in fighting these battles. Over the next hour, I told him about the conference, the people I'd met, the stories I'd heard. He listened intently, occasionally blinking responses. When I finished, he spelled out a message. PROUD, not the first time he'd told me that, but it hit me just as hard as before. My father, who'd built a successful business from nothing, who'd served in Vietnam, who'd raised me alone after my mother died, was proud of me. For fighting for him, yes, but also for using that fight to help others. "Thanks, Dad. That means everything." The months rolled into years. My father's condition remained remarkably stable. The doctors called it miraculous that he'd survived so long with his level of disability. I called it stubbornness. He wasn't ready to go, wasn't done living, even in his limited way. So he held on day after day, his will stronger than his body. The generator ran without major issues, requiring only routine maintenance. I'd long since stopped hearing it as a distinct sound. It was just part of the background, like the refrigerator hum or the air conditioning. But every time I thought about it, I remembered what it meant. Life, defiance, love. The Arizona Fair Housing Protection Act inspired similar legislation in other states. Within 3 years, 12 states had passed their own versions, each strengthening protections for residents needing reasonable accommodations. The federal bill was still working through Congress, slow as always, but gaining support. I continued helping people navigate HOA disputes, now with a small nonprofit I'd started with Sarah's help. We provided free legal consultations, connected people with attorneys, and advocated for policy changes. It wasn't a full-time job, but it gave purpose to what we'd been through. Linda, the woman with the emotional support dog, won her case and became an advocate herself. We stayed in touch, occasionally teaming up to help others. She was fiercer than I'd ever been, channeling her anger at what she'd endured into powerful activism. George continued as HOA president, running unopposed for 3 consecutive terms. Under his leadership, our neighborhood became something of a model for how HOAs should operate. People from other communities would visit to learn about our reasonable accommodation policies, our conflict resolution procedures, our focus on community building over rule enforcement. "You started all this," George told me once over beers in his backyard. "Before you fought back, I just accepted that this was how HOAs worked. You showed us it could be different. I was just trying to keep my father alive. That's my point. You weren't trying to change the world. You were just doing what needed to be done. That's how real change happens." One person refusing to accept injustice, even when acceptance would be easier. I thought about that conversation a lot in the years that followed, about how we don't always choose our battles, sometimes they choose us, about how standing up for yourself can mean standing up for everyone, about how one stubborn man and a generator could reshape community standards and state law. My father lived another 4 years after that initial confrontation with Patricia. 4 years of steady medical care, small joys, and profound connection despite his physical limitations. We developed a shorthand that went beyond our alphabet system, a way of communicating that transcended words. I could read his needs in the tension of his jaw, the focus of his gaze, the rhythm of his breathing. When the end came, it was peaceful. His body simply wore out, systems shutting down one by one despite the machine's best efforts. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath, Maria on his other side. We'd seen it coming for days, that gradual decline that signaled his time was near. "You fought so hard," I whispered as the monitors flat-lined. "You can rest now, Dad. You earned it." I turned off the ventilator, then the monitors, then walked outside and shut down the generator. For the first time in nearly 5 years, my backyard was silent. The silence was deafening. Over the next weeks, as I arranged the funeral and settled my father's affairs, that silence followed me. I'd grown so accustomed to the generator's hum that its absence felt wrong. The house felt empty in a way I'd never experienced. The funeral was well attended. Not just family and old friends, but neighbors, people from the HOA, folks I'd helped through the nonprofit. Maria and her family came, crying as hard as I was. Rebecca brought flowers from her garden. George gave a short speech about how my father's struggle had changed our community for the better. Frederick Daniels never knew the impact his illness would have, George said. But because his son refused to give up on him, because Frank fought for his father's right to live with dignity and support, all of us learned something important. We learned that rules matter less than people. That community means taking care of each other, especially the most vulnerable. Fred's legacy isn't just in the family he raised, but in the positive change that came from his son's love and determination. I appreciated the sentiment, but it felt strange to attach such weight to what had felt like simple necessity. I hadn't fought Patricia and the HOA to change the world. I'd fought to keep my father alive. Everything else was just consequence. After everyone left and I was alone in my too-quiet house, I walked out to the generator. It sat silent in its acoustic enclosure, no longer needed. I ran my hand along its surface, cool now after years of constant heat. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for keeping him safe. For giving us time together." It was just a machine. It couldn't hear me. But saying the words felt important anyway. In the weeks that followed, I struggled with what to do with my life. For 5 years, my father's care had defined my existence. Everything revolved around his needs, his schedule, his medical requirements. Now, suddenly, I had freedom I didn't know how to use. Freedom I wasn't sure I wanted. The nonprofit helped. Throwing myself into advocacy work gave me purpose and kept me connected to the meaning I'd found in our struggle. But it wasn't enough to fill the void. I was 43 years old, single, living alone in a house full of empty rooms and the absence of purpose. Then Sarah called with an opportunity. There's a national advocacy organization looking for a director of their HOA reform initiative, she said. Based in D.C., decent salary, real chance to make systemic change. I immediately thought of you. I'm not qualified to run a national program. You're the most qualified person I know. You've lived it, fought it, and won. You've helped dozens of others navigate the system. You've testified before legislators. You speak at conferences. Frank, you're already doing the work. This would just make it official and give you resources to do it better. I considered it for about 30 seconds before realizing she was right. This was what came next. This was how I honored my father's memory and gave lasting meaning to our struggle. Tell them I'm interested, I said. 3 months later, I sold my house in Phoenix and moved to Washington, D.C. The generator went with me, though I'd never use it again. Some things you keep not because they're useful, but because they're precious. That generator had kept my father alive for years. It deserved better than a scrapyard. The new job was everything Sarah had promised, and more challenging than I'd imagined. I worked with legislators on federal HOA reform bills, coordinated with state advocacy groups, managed a team of lawyers and organizers, and continued speaking publicly about the need for change. It was hard work, often frustrating, always slower than I wanted. But gradually, things happened. More states passed protective legislation. A federal bill gained momentum, picking up co-sponsors from both parties. Media coverage of HOA abuses increased, raising public awareness, and individual people dealing with their own Patricia Winters reached out for help and got it. Some battles we won, some we lost, but every person who fought back made the next fight a little easier. 5 years after my father's death, the Federal HOA Reform and Homeowner Protection Act passed Congress and was signed into law. It established baseline protections for homeowners nationwide, limited HOA authority in several key areas, and created enforcement mechanisms for people facing discrimination or abuse. It wasn't perfect. No law ever is. But it was real, meaningful progress. Standing in the Rose Garden as the president signed the bill, surrounded by advocates who'd fought for years to make this happen, I thought about my father, about Patricia, about that generator running endlessly in my Phoenix backyard. "We did it, Dad," I whispered. "It took 10 years, but we changed things, really changed them." I imagined his response. One blink. Yes, and maybe if machines could hold memories, the faint hum of a generator that had meant everything.